All right, welcome back to another episode of Empire Builders. I am your nerdy host, nerdy historian host, Will Tiemann.
And I'm the actual analytics nerd, Mike Cherniff, for being nerds today.
Well, we're excited to bring this episode today, brought to you by the Racket Room, your finest tennis equipment on the market. And this episode that we're excited to bring you is Churchill in 1940, leadership when collapse felt inevitable. Let's take us back to May 10th, 1940. Europe is collapsing. German tanks are smashing into Belgium. The Netherlands is falling. France is about to be overwhelmed. In Britain, a new prime minister walks into Downing Street. His name is Winston Churchill, and almost nobody thinks he's the right man for the job. In fact, many people think he's an absolute disaster waiting to happen.
Well, which is crazy because today we think of Churchill as one of the greatest leaders in history, right?
One of the best. I coach high school tennis, and I always lean on him for leadership. He is in high school tennis is a lot different than being a prime minister in the war.
Well, and to your point,
But
people who know nothing, who aren't history buffs, right? People who know nothing about this point in history, like they know his name.
for sure, for sure, and we remember him as a legend. We don't remember the uncertainty, the fact that many of members of his own party didn't actually trust him. Now, the fact that much of Britain's political establishment preferred someone else.
Right. This isn't Churchill right now at this point you're talking about standing on top of a mountain. This is Churchill being handed the steering wheel while the car is already on its way off the cliff.
That's exactly it. And within weeks, Britain faces a terrifying possibility. What if the war is already lost? Not what if things get difficult? What if Germany has already won?
And that's what's so fascinating about this story. You think you think leadership books and seminars, things like that, they're about managing growth, but this situation that he's inherited is about managing a collapse, right? Is that fair
Yes,
to say?
that is 100% fair to say at this point in time. Britain faces a question that organizations, governments, and leaders still face today. What do you do when every available option looks absolutely terrible?
Well, let's jump right into the uncomfortable question. It's May 1940. Germany controls most of Europe. Like you said, France is collapsing. Britain stands all by themselves. Would you explore peace negotiations?
A lot of reasonable people wanted to. That's what gets lost. This wasn't really cowardice. This wasn't really let's not fight on. This was just practicality of where they were at that point in time.
Well, exactly, because if someone pitched this situation today, it sounds insane. Let's fight the strongest military machine, the strongest war machine in Europe, while standing mostly alone.
I mean, in many ways, it wasn't even just Europe. It was, the whole world, right? And many members of Churchill's war cabinet wanted to at least investigate possible terms.
And honestly, a lot of CEOs today, right, would do the same thing. A company's losing, cash is running dry, competitors are getting stronger, right? Maybe the board says, hey, it could be time to sell.
Yeah. Well, Churchill's answer was very, very different. He believed negotiation would become surrender, and surrender would become permanent dependence on Germany.
Yeah, 100%.
And the world, is falling apart at this point in time. The speed of Germany's advance really shocks everyone. Military experts expected another slow-moving war. Instead, German forces move with breathtaking speed, right? Entire armies become trapped. Governments panic. Refugees flood across Europe. We're talking, thousands and thousands of people in France going down, the Paris road to the south. And nobody really seen anything quite like it.
And this is one of those moments where if you're living through this time, you're probably thinking the world is ending, right? This is what the end of the world looks like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And here's what's important. Churchill isn't operating with hindsight, right? He doesn't know Britain actually survives. He doesn't know that America eventually enters the war. he doesn't know Germany ultimately loses the war. And that's the key point to understand here.
Well, and exactly, he doesn't have the benefit of hindsight, right? He's making decisions without knowing the ending, which is what real leadership actually looks like. Every conversation you and I have ever heard on this topic or participated in on this topic has been with the benefit of hindsight, right? We know the good guys win, but in his time, he doesn't know this, right? He's making decisions on the fly.
Right. And like I said, he was in the minority at that point in time and wanting to not go for peace negotiations with Germany. History often removes this uncertainty, like you were talking about. The people actually living in the moment never get that luxury, right? And I kind of want to bring this point together during the cabinet room meetings with Winston Churchill. One moment actually stands out to me. It was late 1940, and Churchill gathers with his war cabinet, right? The discussion turns to peace negotiations. Some argue that British should use intermediaries to explore terms with Hitler, like Italy and Mussolini. That was, their intermediary that they wanted to use. The room was super intense. Nobody knows exactly what is going to come next. And Churchill basically asked a question. If we stop fighting now, what kind of Britain survives this?
And I mean, that's a powerful framing, but it's a realistic framing, right? That's, that was the question.
It certainly is, because this suddenly this conversation isn't just about survival. It's about identity. It's about who is Britain? What does Britain stand for?
Exactly. Like, what are we preserving? The country, the principles that make it worth preserving. And leaders face versions of that question constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something I think about a lot. People love compromise. Compromise is usually smart, but not always, right? You kind of have to, it's like know when to hold them, know when to fold them type of thing. And this
No
is
one to
kind of the
hold,
ultimate version of
no
that.
one to fold. Yeah, and Churchill believed some decisions become existential.
Well, absolutely. And modern examples exist too, right? Sometimes companies compromise themselves into irrelevance. Sometimes countries compromise themselves into dependence, right?
Right. And the challenge is figuring out when you're being stubborn and when you're protecting something essential.
Well, and that's almost impossible in real time, right? I mean, if you're being stubborn and you're protecting something essential, you can only really determine that with the benefit of hindsight. Not you can't,
Right.
you don't know that in real time.
No, you don't. And that's what, this is going to be a common theme throughout this episode is Churchill did not know what was coming in real time. And that's what is making him so brilliant, because at the time they thought it was over. And it really kind of came to a head at Dunkirk. Dunkirk is one of the more famous evacuations in history. Hundreds of thousands of British and Allied troops become trapped against the sea. German armies close in, and many expect an absolute catastrophe, because essentially all of England's military was trapped in France at the time. And like I said, the Germans were closing in.
Well, and basically Britain's army is about to disappear at this point.
Yes,
Is that
and
fair? Yeah.
potentially, it's honestly, if you were playing the probability, you probably would have played it 85% that it was going to disappear. And if that happens, Britain's ability to continue to the war becomes questionable at best. And the situation looks absolutely hopeless.
And this point's kind of where the story starts to become almost cinematic, right? I guess it does become cinematic, right? Wasn't there a whole movie, Dunkirk, not too long ago?
There was.
No,
It was.
there was. Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it is. I feel like it's a Christopher Nolan movie. I think Cillian Murphy was in that too. He may not have been.
Well, and this is
But
another one of those things where even if you're not a history buff like you, right? Even if you're just kind of I mean, like me, a little more than the average bear, right? But you're not a history buff. This is another one of those things that you know about. I mean, yeah.
for sure. And what's wild is, so Germany made a colossal mistake during this Dunkirk. They were closing in, and their military leaders wanted to keep coming, and Hitler said no. and he halted the attack for a while, and it ultimately helped Britain escape. Not escape, but go back to across the English Channel. And, essentially that was the key, right? It's not, their goal was never to achieve victory. Their goal was to survive. And thousands of military vessels, fishing boats, ferry, civilian crafts, it was kind of all hands on deck, is mobilized by Winston Churchill and the English military, because at this point they were standing all alone. And one of my favorite stories of this is more of a human element, but a British soldier, he's waiting on the beach at Dunkirk. Bombers are overheard, smoke filling the horizon. No certainty that rescue is actually coming. And in a letter found by his family, he writes a simple message: "If I don't make it home, tell Dad I tried." Think about that. That's not strategy. That's not geopolitics. It's really just one young man hoping someone tells his father that he did his best to return home back to England.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about me being the analytics guy, the kind of casual history fan, right? Whatever you want to call it, but that's the kind of stuff that you miss, right? The statistics, the whatever, the black and white of it. That's the stuff that gets missed in that approach.
And that's 100% right. History is millions of individual human stories stacked together. It's not so much statistics. Obviously, statistics are a big part in a lot of things, but emotional memories and stories are a big reason why people remember history.
Well, and do you think it's fair to say that that's what Churchill was ultimately fighting for, right? That was his primary motivation, not maps, people.
Well, that's absolutely what he was fighting for. He was fighting for the identity of the British people to survive, their soul, their identity to survive.
Well, now let me ask you this, and this is the fun part of this for me, right? It's almost like story time for me being on this. Just
Yep.
like love to pick your brain about this. So let me ask you this: in your opinion, was Dunkirk actually a victory for the Allies?
That's a great question. Militarily, absolutely not. They retreated. They lost.
Right.
Yeah, militarily, no.
Exactly. Yet today we celebrate it. It's almost like a lot of people think of it as kind of a turning point.
Yeah, because sometimes survival is a success, and that's why we think of it as a success, right? Because we survived, we lived to fight another day. And a lot of times in business, in life, in war, it's about knowing when to fold them, when to hold them, however that saying that you did go. And
We don't have the money to pay Kenny Rogers yet, though. We're not paying him. He can bill us.
No, we do not. But that is essentially really important to know when to, live to fight another day. And that's, essentially what he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit it on you hit the nail on the head there with this idea of living to die another day, right? Because, in modern terms, I personally think businesses get this wrong all the time, right? They think every quarter has to be growth. Every year has to be expansion. But sometimes the goal is simply staying alive long enough to fight another day, right? And, businesses that, kind of weather storms, right? Through this idea of the business cycle, right? You have your ups and downs and ups and downs. You can blame presidents, you can blame external factors, right? But, ultimately over time, you observe kind of the up and down of the economy. And businesses who can weather that storm live to fight another day. Because, if you're, weathering that storm at sea, literally, you try to be too aggressive, you're too cocky, you don't appreciate the dangers, you don't know to be conservative, down you go, right?
And Churchill... Yeah, and Churchill understood that. He understood that it's not time to fight right now. It's time to survive, and that's exactly what the British people did. And then Churchill does something absolutely remarkable. He starts speaking, and he was actually a really, really good speaker. He actually spent hours and hours studying speeches. So this wasn't him just being like, some magical. He is a magical person, but he really studied speeches, and he didn't just do it on whims, if that makes sense. But He starts speaking as a moral engine. His speeches become weapons, right? His famous speech is like, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing strips. We shall fight, fight, fight." And then his other speech, "Their finest hour." Words like this, people still quote decades later. Decades later. I'm quoting it right now.
Well, and he's not telling people in these speeches that everything is fine, right? He's not placating people.
No, he's not. He's actually doing the opposite. He's saying this is going to be really, really hard, and we're going to get through it, but we're going to have to fight, fight, fight.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of what was it? Blood, toil, tears, and sweat, something like that. I mean, that's not optimism. That's not, that's reality. That's like, hey, this is going to suck, but we're going to prevail. Right?
That is yeah. No, that's exactly right. That's That's a modern leadership lesson. People don't need false confidence. They need people to believe believe their confidence. Right? If you believe something, it's super powerful, whether it's true or not. Belief is a powerful thing, and kind of gets me back to this to another story. A lot of people know about London and the 1940 and the Blitz, and how everybody was able to not everybody will survive that, but Britain as a whole was able to survive the Blitz of London. But during the Blitz, one London family, they sheltered underground every night. The children start recognizing the sound of incoming aircraft. Imagine that, being 8 years old and identifying bombers by sound. And one evening, after emerging from a shelter, they discover their street has been hit, and half the homes were gone. Yet neighbors immediately start helping each other dig through the rubble.
It's incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. And Churchill wasn't creating courage. Millions of ordinary people had already had it. He was just giving the voice.
Well, and I've always, to that point, right? Him giving the voice. I've always kind of wondered this: did Churchill create Britain's resilience, right? Or did he reveal that resilience in the British people that was already there?
That's a great question. I really lean towards reveal. I mean, Britain has never been conquered for like 1,000 years, so they're very, very resilient people.
Well, they got a pretty swift kick in the ass about 250 years ago from
Yeah,
us.
I like to. They didn't know it. They didn't know it was coming. We had a bunch of pitchfork farmers and beat the best military in the world.
That's right.
They humbled them out a little bit. That's for sure.
Well, but going back to your point, I'm inclined to agree with you. Right, one person can't manufacture that sort of courage for an entire country. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. But they can focus on it. They can amplify it. They can help people believe that they're part of something larger, and everybody wants to believe that they're part of something larger, right?
And that's what great leaders do. They don't create energy. They channel it. They harness it, like you said, and sort of redirect it. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, this story though feels pretty relevant today. Probably more than most people realize, because every organization eventually, if you think about it, kind of faces a much smaller scale version of that 1940 moment, right? Not literally, metaphorically. It could be a crisis like a market collapse, a disruption of some sort, a competitor that bursts onto the scene and feels completely unbeatable.
Right. In a moment when confidence just completely evaporates, and that could really happen at any time.
Oh yeah, and the temptation's always the same, right? Panic, quit, sell, retreat.
Right. And Churchill's lesson isn't that optimism wins. It really isn't. It's fight, 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 and hopefully we get out on top.
Sure. Yeah, that clarity matters, right? Face the reality, acknowledge the danger, then move, right? Then make your move. And honestly, that's probably why this particular story endures, because Churchill wasn't leading from strength. He was leading from weakness, right? He started from an incredible disadvantage. And that makes the story that much more incredible, and makes what he accomplished that much more difficult.
No, I completely agree. I mean, because he was able to give clarity to the people of Great Britain, he accomplished that much more.
So kind of wrapping up this idea of Churchill, right, and how we think about him. How from your kind of history buff standpoint, how should we think about Churchill in 1940? What's your sort of like distilled idea?
Well, in 1940, not as confident as the hero history often portrays. Probably the reason for it is it was 1940 and we didn't really know what was going to happen. Obviously, we think he's the greatest now because we know exactly what happened. Britain was able to hold on. The United States entered the war, and the Allies were able to be victorious.
Yeah, kind of somebody like facing down impossible odds, right?
For sure. And a man that was making decisions, he didn't know the ending, right? He was just doing what he thought was best at that given moment. And at the time, you have to remember Hitler and Germany said a lot of things, but they never really stuck to them. So a peace negotiation didn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he wanted to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just kind of in doing that, trying to hold together a country when collapse felt, entirely possible and even likely at certain points, right?
Yeah, because leadership isn't tested when everything is working. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Your true colors really come out when everything isn't working, and that's when true leadership is on display.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, Churchill had, like we said at the top, Churchill had no idea that Britain would win. He had no idea that good guys would come out on top. He only knew that quitting would guarantee defeat, right? So he sort of had to go down swinging in his mind, I'm sure.
You're 100% correct. In 1940, Churchill couldn't promise victory. It was really quite the opposite. It was really quite the opposite.
Yeah, he couldn't promise safety to his people.
Right. And what he did offer instead was something far, far rare.
Which is the belief that, some fights are worth continuing even when the odds say that you shouldn't, right? Maybe you should look for an alternate.
Right. And maybe that's the leadership lesson that really never goes out of date. The true honesty and the true leadership that he provided. But well,
Absolutely.
thanks for listening in to Empire Builders. We'll be back next week with I believe Henry Ford and his assembly line and how that changed the world. We're very excited for that one.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your week, everybody.
Thanks for listening, guys.